The Christmas tree is a tradition that's provided joy and meaning for millions of families across the globe over the course of centuries. But reasons for putting up a Christmas tree have changed a lot, and so have the kinds of trees that we use. Today, more people are celebrating Christmas with a fake tree that they probably ordered off of Amazon than a real thing they found in a forest, and this trend is only getting bigger. So this script was written by our writer with the most Christmassy name ever, Holly, and it turns out that she actually has quite a bit of interest in this subject. And also there is apparently a correct time to put up your Christmas tree during the year, but we won't tell you about that until the end of the video. Now we're going to get into Holly's weirdly specific knowledge about Christmas stuff in a minute, but first we have to set the scene for where Christmas trees are today, because it's insane. Trees nowadays are too complicated. Now, I grew up on a rural patch of land, and my parents and I would literally go and cut down a tree that was just growing on the side of our driveway every year. But it turns out that I am a very special, unique, and only child person, because the vast majority of people in the world don't have that experience. Most of you normies, city folk, get a tree from a big box retailer like Home Depot, or you go to a local tree farm and spend something like 80 bucks so that you can get that perfect tree. Now, we're going to talk a bit about those options in a minute, but what we're talking about today is fake trees, which are a totally different thing. You can spend anywhere between $30,000 and $10,000 for a tree on Wayfair.com, which is wild. They have an entire page dedicated to all the different kinds of tree options, ranging from cute little 1-footers to 20-foot beasts. You can get pre-lit trees, frosted trees, colored trees, spiral trees, half of a tree, or get this, they have an entire section for trees that are upside down. They literally have 11,000 options. Like when we started researching this video, I knew fake trees were pretty popular, but I did not realize how in the woods we were on this one. Needless to say, things have gone a long way since this tradition started. Now believe me, Holly made sure that this story would not lack the historical context which makes today's fake Christmas tree phenomenon what it is. So where do Christmas trees come from, you might ask? Well, Christmas trees were associated with the Christian religion, which might make sense if you kind of put those words beside each other. However, evergreens as a category have been a major symbol for various winter celebrations across cultures for thousands of years, and it's not too hard to understand why. If you think about it, it's dark and cold, the trees are green and nice looking. We also have to mention that pagans in Europe decorated their homes with branches to celebrate the winter solstice. I don't even know what a pagan is. I thought pagan was like people who eat whole foods. And Romans used them to decorate their temples to celebrate Saturnalia. But for early Christians, Christmas was about the creator of light and life itself becoming a human to defeat death and darkness, i.e. the birth of Christ. You can perhaps see where the Christmas tree fits into that narrative. The practice eventually caught on as an expression of German culture and started to creep its way into other parts of the world. And apparently it wasn't until this photo of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert was published in a magazine in 1848 that the practice really went viral. Quite literally, we can almost single-handedly thank this royal influencer couple for the massive proliferation of Christmas trees around the world, from Japan to Australia to Greenland, you name it, it's because of those old people. I guess they weren't kind of old then, but they're dead now, so we can call them old. And today, the tree has now really transcended its religious roots, and its popularity continues to grow. According to the American Christmas Tree Association, which is totally a thing, 94% of consumers plan on setting up at least one Christmas tree this year, which is funny because only 63% of Americans identify as Christian. Some estimates show that there are almost 50 million trees sold in America alone. About half of these are real trees grown in tree farms. Today, Christmas trees represent a totally real multi-billion-dollar industry. I guess we did it with livestock and with grains and other food staples, so why wouldn't we do it with tiny trees that we put in our houses at a specific time of the year? Humans are just so weird. Now this industry, like any other one, is more complex than it seems on the surface, and over the years things have really changed. There are about 300,000 acres of US land dedicated solely to growing 350 million Christmas trees at any given time. The largest American farm alone ships out 1 million trees a year. But the tree slinging game is not for the faint of heart. For starters, it requires a massive amount of land that can't be used for anything else, like growing food, for example. Then you have to maintain a crop that can take a decade to mature, and just cross your fingers that a forest fire doesn't wipe them out right at the very end. Then, of course, you have to predict what people want 10 years from now, which is no mean feat. Supply and demand imbalances are a very real situation in this scenario. If the product survives all that, according to The Hustle, a farm might only make $8 to $10 a tree, or $1 per year of growth. Now, it is a wonder that the business survived this long, and it is only getting harder. As you can imagine, there has been some backlash towards using real Christmas trees at Christmas time, but apparently this started, believe it or not, back in the 1800s. Now, you might not have guessed this, but apparently 19th century Germans cut down enough Christmas trees that they started getting a bit concerned about deforestation. So some people started making trees out of, dyed goose feathers, which isn't nearly as weird as when we made trees out of essentially old toilet bowl brushes. Yeah, people decorated poop cleaners in their homes to save the trees, and I actually kind of love it. Jokes aside here, they had a point. Today, we don't just have to worry about deforestation, but all the other added stuff that goes into a tree farm. Because these are such a long-term crop, their environmental impact is kind of hard to grasp. But even just the fact that they're all the same tree is a big problem. Because the Christmas tree is a fir tree that looks a certain way, and these farms are forced to create an entire monoculture, which, as you might know, makes them super vulnerable to diseases and stuff. So if one identical tree gets infected, the rest do too, and you lose your whole crop all at once. This is something that we've seen across the entire industrialized food system, and it's awful for the planet, but it's particularly difficult with a crop like this. So as a result of this monoculture system, these crops require a buttload of pesticides and fertilizers to maximize the investment. Now, fertilizers may not be inherently evil, but the thing with Christmas trees is that A, they're a totally unnecessary crop, which B, requires a lot of space and nutrients, and C, takes years to grow. So it all kind of compounds on itself. The amount of extra stuff that we dump on these trees has the potential to add up. Not to mention all the machinery required to harvest and transport these beasts. Large farms even use helicopters to prevent some trees from breaking. So ironically, real trees have become a bit of an environmental villain, and the artificial tree made its debut as a result. These plastic suckers were quicker, longer lasting, cheaper, and a more convenient option that doesn't require hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland to produce.
Ain't no needles coming off this here tree.
Now, we will say that the primary reason why most people buy fake trees is not for the environment, but because they are convenient. But anyway, initially, plastic trees took quite a while to gain traction because most people just liked the idea of having a real tree in their house. But then in the 60s, we got a lot better at making realistic fake trees. This was good tidings for the fake tree bros, but not so much for the farmers. And since then, the industry has really sprouted, overtaking the real tree business bit by bit. And now we're at the point where almost 80% of American Christmas trees are artificial, with the remaining fifth of tree decorators remaining purists. But now you might be asking yourself, which one's better? And I'm here to definitively say that it's super complicated. Now, if you saw our video about paper straws, you might see where we're going here. We ditched these real trees to save the planet and prevent deforestation, so now we're using plastic ones. But now, if you ask most environmentalists today which ones we should be using, they're recommending that we go back to real trees. Without repeating too many of the details, the sort of consensus is that real trees win in their eco-friendliness. You can recycle them, you can feed them to goats apparently, they're biodegradable, they don't leach microplastics into the ecosystem, and they don't fill up in landfills. They're also not made of hazardous materials shipped all the way across the entire world. However, you might be saying a big draw of the artificial trees is that they have the potential to last much longer. The big debate here is just how long you need to keep the fake tree in order for it to offset the other real trees that you would have had to buy, right? The number that you hear a lot is about 10 or more years. But how many of you keep anything for more than 10 years nowadays, right? We live in a disposable culture. And this 10-year number is based on the emissions of that product versus the other, which is a kind of oversimplified way of looking at the issue. What about the impacts of farms at a pollution level, the loss of natural areas that they represent? I mean, we don't have all the answers here, but it's something that we need to mention when we're talking about these kinds of comparisons. But it actually gets kind of worse. Interestingly, the fact that artificial trees exist at all might be making real trees less eco-friendly. With so much competition from the faux fir tree market, there's actually less space for small-scale dealers to sell their responsibly felled trees here and there. And farms have long felt the pressure to do whatever they can to reduce the prices to compete, which means that they're increasing the amount of chemicals and fertilizers that make their stuff grow faster. And then there is less of a market at home here in Canada where a lot of these trees are grown. And that means that we're exporting more of these trees to other places around the world, like Thailand, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and others. See? I told you that this was gonna be complicated. Could you imagine being in Russia buying a Canadian-grown Christmas tree? Now, of course, there are better and worse ways of doing this, right? Like you can get a used plastic Christmas tree, which would help extend the product's life. You could harvest trees like I did with my family from a ditch or, some sort of responsible area. But in the end, there is another thing that I think we need to look at, which is what Christmas trees have come to represent. Radiohead isn't the only one who feels that there's something inherently off about rocking around a fake Christmas tree, if just on a psychological level. As a professor in Montreal put it, we live in an artificial environment. The Christmas tree is one of the few things left that is natural. Remember that Christmas trees started off as a representation of hope and joy and life when we needed it most. Artificial trees were initially a response to deforestation, and they still have a valid function today, but they've also become an icon of consumerism.
This really brings Christmas close to a person.
In 2019, CNN wrote about how more Christmas trees are being sold than ever before, but not necessarily because more people are looking for meaningful ways to bond with their families over a century-old tradition. Rather, it's at least partly because the people having kids and starting new traditions, namely millennials like myself, are obsessed with flaunting their stuff on Instagram. Christmas trees happen to be extremely photogenic, like they're really easy to post on Instagram for a generation obsessed with the internet. Now don't get me wrong, I love a pretty Christmas tree as much as the next person, but I think we're missing out when the fact that it's pretty is the only reason that we're buying it. The thing about Christmas trees and Christmas in general is that to do them well in a way that supports your local economy without destroying it, it requires a bit more work and intention. In many places, you can source trees from local farms that may try to be more responsible. You can build your own tree today. There's lots of DIY options out there. A lot of them use recycled materials that you can find around your house. We've also come across businesses that will rent you a potted live tree and then rent it out again the next year, which I think is kind of awesome. And at the very least, if you really don't want to have to deal with the hassle, find yourself a secondhand tree and use that thing as long as bloody possible. But whatever it is that you do this holiday season, just don't buy the friggin' upside down tree thing and I'll be happy. Hopefully you have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you so much for being a future-proof watcher, a subscriber, and if you like this video, literally like it so that we can keep making more of them next year. Bye everyone. All right, and for those of you who sticked around all the way to the end, figure out when you're supposed to put up your Christmas tree. The day is December 4th. If you did put it up on a different day, you're wrong. Sorry, you're the worst.